plugin of the week is the Waves BSS DPR-402. This is an actual piece of hardware. It's an emulation of a piece of hardware made by a company called BSS. BSS is actually still in existence, although they don't still make this particular hardware unit. They're more into network audio, which is a big thing at this time. But this was actually a really, really cool VCA compressor peak limiter de-esser. Really, really powerful one, made in the 1980s. And I worked a bit on this, and there were some very quirky things about it, and I kind of want to go over it. And it's easy to kind of misunderstand what's going on with it. So I want to kind of do an overview first so you sort of understand it. And for the time, incredibly revolutionary, because this is probably the most detailed dynamics processor that you'll find, and it was doing things in terms of compression at a time when nobody else was even doing anything sort of remotely close that I ever knew of. Or if you were doing some of the sidechain things in particular that they were doing, you were processing it on your own externally and using that as a trigger signal. So they kind of do some interesting things here. So what you primarily have is you have an input gain section here. You have a de-esser section. And at times when you switch between different modes, some of these features will gray out. You have a threshold, pretty self-explanatory. Ratio, again, self-explanatory. Attack, release, all of that, output gain. So most of the compressor settings are pretty straightforward. You can monitor the sidechain signal, and this is really key. And then there is a peak limiter all the way over on the right. So the peak limiter can work independent, or does work independent of the compressor section. It's actually after the compressor section. And you could set a slow or a fast attack time on it. Now, what's interesting about this in particular is that this switch was actually on the back of the unit. And there's another feature here which is also required jumpers on the back end of the unit. You have a bypass control, so this is set up here. You notice that there's a link button, but clicking on the link doesn't actually unlink it, because all of that works into the added section. So there's a collapse expand selector down here at the bottom. And when you open that up, it opens up the jumper settings, which I'm going to get into in a second. You have a mix control, so this allows you to set the wet-dry balance of compressed and non-compressed signal. You can bring in the original noise of the unit, which was not significant or a lot, but it's there. And then you can operate in stereo mode, which locks the two sides together, dual mode, which allows you to adjust the settings independently of each other for left and right, or MS mode. And those were not modes that were available. There was no MS mode with the original hardware unit, so understand that. And you could also hear in the section monitor in monitor the left, right signal, or the stereo signal. So it gives you some monitoring options in terms of the way that you listen to the output of it. Now, where things get a little bit interesting here is with the jumper settings. The actual hardware unit had a backplate, and under the backplate were jumper settings, so these kind of little switches that you could flip. And when going to different settings, what it would do is it would open up different characteristics, or actually make the compressor unit operate in different ways. So you could turn the compressor actually into an expander. And not only could you do it in an expander like wideband, but also just low frequencies, just high frequencies. And so it opens up some interesting things, possibilities. There's a narrow low frequency control, wide low frequency control, low frequency emphasis, all of these different settings, or just normal compression. Now, what's really cool is that if you select any of the given modes, like so if I select this, what Waves has done is they've done something really smart, because rather than kind of going all the way back to the menu, to the manual by clicking on the, on the question mark here in the toolbar, there's actually a question mark that's built right here. And what this does is it actually opens up and tells you what is going on with that particular setting. So as you toggle through, it will tell you essentially what its particular thing is doing. And so as you toggle through them, you can see that it will give you the setup and settings of just what's happening with each individual one. So which is kind of cool. So that when we work it, we can actually get into, all of the, everything that it does. So let's have a listen and start. So I'm going to turn this off here, and we'll start there and work from that place. So right now I'm going to have it on the mix bus here, and then I may move it around to some other areas. Or maybe what I'll do here, just for the sake of kind of digging into this, is just move it right over to the drums, and let's just kind of work with drums for this. So it's a VCA compressor, right? So so what I'm going to do here is I'll start with a 4-to-1 ratio. We'll kind of leave it there, and I could do. Let's just do a. I'll do a sort of slower attack, fast release style compression. What's really cool about this is that it actually goes to 5 microseconds. It's 5 millionths of a second, which is insanely fast. And then I got my threshold here. So what you see is an input signal. This tells you that signal is reached threshold. And then I start to see gain reduction here. See, but that's a 3 dB mark. It gives you up to 30 dB of gain reduction without overdriving. So a little makeup gain here. There's no auto makeup with this. So you can see how it gives you like a real punchy VCA type of sound. Nothing, you don't have to dig deep into it. And that's just with a kind of standard, I guess if you drag this up, these actually, these settings are click stop settings. So there's no points in between. That's true to the original. So as you go 20, then you go to 50, then to 100 milliseconds. So those are pretty long release times. But that allows you to kind of push the attack through, and and then of course as you drive the threshold, you can determine how much. So it's like a nice pump and breathe type of thing. What's really cool is that if there was some overshoot and I wanted to pick it up, I can actually put it in with the limiter here. The limiter actually operates after the compressor, and there are not a lot of units that do that. 2254, 33609 come to mind, where the limiter is after the compression. Quite often it's before. So this is picking up overshoot, especially when you're working in this type of mode here. So this would allow me to kind of operate, and it's just simple, single thing. And I'll see my gain reduction displayed up here. Now, this is actually what's interesting here. Like if I go up to red, we're getting into excessive amounts of gain reduction. It actually, it's a 20-to-1 limiter. And by the time you get to red, you're getting like to 10 dB of gain reduction, which is usually pretty excessive. But that can actually help to kind of compact the drum sound. Unless that's what if you don't want to do it. So let's put the limiter in. So you get a good basic idea of what it's what it's capable of, and it actually sounds good. This is very true to the original. In going back to this time working with this is very transparent compressor unit, whereas most vintage components, like even like VCA ones, like the DBX-160, had a specific character to them, a specific sound to them, and the SSL compressors, VCA compressors, had a real specific sound to them. And this one, as a VCA compressor, because technically they should be very transparent, and this is actually quite transparent on that end and really pushes some things. So now I want to kind of go through here and just show you where this can be like a little bit where you can kind of have some fun with this. Like, say that in this case, what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of pop out a little bit more energy from this. So now I can go on to the jumper settings. And one of the things that I can do here is I can actually go to an expander mode. And in the expander mode, what ends up happening is that I'm going to push out once the signal exceeds threshold, it's going to make the signal kind of upward expand. So I'll lower my output gain here. So now what's cool with this is if you kind of work with it a little bit, like you got a thing where you could sort of pump and breathe and move out the sound. And maybe on this end I would want to, you know, adjust my release time. So now, well, in this case, what I can do is I can exaggerate it and then mix in as much of it as I want. And that allows me to make it a little more natural so I don't hear as much of the pumping and breathing. Now, what's really cool here is if I actually go now here to do this with low frequencies, what I can do now is have it work based on a filter here. And so this filter, which normally is used for the de-esser, when set to this low frequency expand, allows me to actually use this to pump only low frequency. So say, for example, that you had a stereo mix of something where the low frequency pump maybe of the kick drum or something like that wasn't kind of pushing out. What I could do here is I'm going to monitor the chain here, and I'm setting this filter. So this is the crossover point. So I'm just monitoring the side chain. And now you could see that it's the kick drum that's driving the energy, as opposed to the wideband expander. Here, I'll set the mix up higher. So you can see it's more kick and snare. And likewise, I can actually also use this to expand high frequency. So frequencies above the selected frequency here will get expanded upward. And then I can affect the balance that way. So you could see how this actually, it's really, really cool because it's kind of multi-banding in a way, even though it's just kind of two bands. And then you got, you know, the different expander controls. You can get low frequency emphasis. This is kind of, with working with these different settings, what you'll end up with is the ability to control the frequency content where the compression is being applied. So as you go through all the different options, what some of them will do is they will compress more in the low frequencies than in the high frequencies, or compress more in the high frequencies than in the low frequencies. It'll shift the balance. And so it's a little bit different than from the expander modes. Now, some of these modes actually work with a filter. So if you're curious which ones do, then you'll see that, like when I monitor the side chain, I'll hear the filter embedded. So if I'm right, so you could hear. Right, that's working with low frequency. And then, so this will give you an idea like of which ones are kind of just working with that, and that will vary based on the content. So, so I'm going to switch it back here to this. Let's kind of put one of these on the guitars and see if I can get this to sort of drive a little bit more on the guitar side of things. Similar thing to what I did with the drum. So I can get things to kind of pump and drive a little bit better here. Another very powerful way of using this, and I'll kind of open this up. Now, normally I'm not going to put this on, I would put this on an individual track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the de-esser that's on my vocal tracks here. Head right on to the first verse here. I'm just going to do this on the stem just to kind of, I could demonstrate this pretty quickly. So essentially what I can do here, and this is where it kind of comes to be to work pretty well, is that I can actually operate this as a de-esser. It actually has 3 dynamic processors that all can work together. So if I stay in normal compress mode, then I can set up a
Do you know how many people own your car? Every time I see it, I wonder where you are.
So what I could do here is I could set some de-essing
The
here.
things that made me laugh,
Set the
now they
crossover
make
frequency.
me cry.
I could set the crossover frequency here
I miss the way I felt
for triggering,
looking in your eyes.
and then set
So
my
I keep looking
threshold.
around with my eyes on the ground, trying to find the confidence.
Not
I
my
know
threshold,
I've dropped.
but how much de-essing is occurring, and where it's occurring. So this would be like a full brand de-essing. But here I can also set it up so that with a very light ratio, sort of a longer attack, I could set this up in a long release. I can kind
Do
of
you know how many people own your car?
do a smoothing style compression with some de-essing.
Every time I see it, I wonder where you are.
So it's just a kind of smoothing out compression. They
The
could put a
things that
limiter
made
here.
me laugh, now they make me cry. I miss the way I felt looking in your eyes.
Now, if I wanted to actually work with this on a whole other level and just kind of just do de-essing with it, there are 2 other modes. There's a wideband de-essing mode and a high-frequency de-essing mode. And when you switch to these, now what you'll notice is that this de-ess circuit kind of comes out, and then now here if I do with high frequencies, like if I go to wideband, or this will become like a trigger control, but it will apply compression for the S's as triggered by signals above the selected frequency here. But I'll have controls right here like a normal thing, or I can have it compress high frequencies only, like most the way most de-essers work. So I could set my attack to be 50 microseconds, extremely fast. Probably set my release time at 5 milliseconds to be very fast release. And then I can set up my ratio here.
Do you know how many people own your car? Every time I see it, I wonder where you are.
So here now I could set up the threshold
The
here.
things that made me laugh, now they make me cry. I miss the way I felt looking in your eyes.
Okay, so you could see that the S's are kicking in there, and then I can adjust the settings. So it gives me like a control, more control, or much more control over the way that I actually process. Where most de-essers, the circuit, you get really simple controls. With this is sort of an old school de-esser where you would actually, EQ everything out of a vocal as a sidechain, on a separate track on the console. So they exaggerate the S's and then feed that into the sidechain of a compressor. The SSL console used to be able to do that and feed a sidechain signal right into the compressor and then use that as a de-esser with a fast attack and a fast release. This just gives you even more in-depth or heavier control over it.
Do you know how many people own your car?
And then let's see here. If I actually come out here, I think there's like a section here where there's more S's.
So I keep looking around with my eyes on the ground, trying to find the confidence I know I dropped. I keep retracing my steps, going through the events, trying to find out when the...
So let's listen without.
So I keep looking around with my eyes on the ground, trying to find the confidence I know I dropped. I keep retracing my steps.
Here, I'll just do the lead vocal.
So I keep looking around with my eyes on the ground, trying to find the confidence I know I dropped.
And then this is with the de-esser in.
So I keep looking around with my eyes on the ground, trying to find the confidence I know I dropped. I keep retracing my steps, going through the events, trying to find...
And it works very effectively that way. And then everything that's set in terms of the crossover of what frequencies in the high frequency mode is determined by the filter here. Otherwise, if I'm in wideband mode, then this is just determining the sidechain.
So I keep looking around with
this
my
sidechain
eyes on
signal,
the ground,
sidechain signal.
Confidence I know I...
It's setting the sidechain signal that's triggering the compression, but the compression would be applied wideband or full band.
So I keep looking around with my eyes on the ground, trying to find the confidence I know I dropped. I keep retracing my steps, going through the events, trying to find...
So you get the basic idea there. Really, really, really very cool, revolutionary processor. When you go back, to the fact that this is like from the 1980s and a hardware unit. So I think one of the things that maybe a lot of engineers didn't really get themselves aware of or hip to was all of the jumper settings. And because all of these jumper settings were actually on the back of the unit, that quite often these things, especially when used in like post-production facilities and things like that, they would be set up for a very specific task, and they would be always set up and used in the same way for, like, say, a TV show where the host would be the same, using the same microphone every day. So they would have a setting that would be dialed in specific to them with the jumper setting set the way that they would want it for that particular task. And in studio, a really amazing processor. So a great one, especially for de-essing vocals, where most of the other de-essers were either handmade, you were just kind of doing it yourself with your own sidechain, or other processors that had much more simplified controls. And the essence of it is it's basically a compressor or limiter, very fast attack, very fast release, triggered only by the S's, set your threshold and go. A very cool one though. Great emulation by Waves. This is the BSS DPR-402, a new dynamics emulation by Waves.